can hear me? Possible? So I don't need
yes, we do.
All right, perfect. Good morning. We are very glad that so many of you were already able to join us at 9 o'clock and obviously in a very good state of health. And of course, we were all looking forward to meet you finally in person and to have the possibility to chat on a coffee or in the evening during dinner. But however, we have to do the best out of the situation. And of course, there are also advantages. People can join us quite spontaneously. And what Maya said some days ago was that at least the coffee at home is much better than during a conference, at least usually. So let's immediately start, as I have only 5 minutes to introduce everything. As we already heard at the beginning of the conference, resources can be considered as a driving force for the transformation of societies. However, to understand their implication, it is perhaps not enough to observe only large-scale patterns. To approach their impact on the macro scale, we have to understand on a micro level how people are handling these resources, as for instance, in the process of making artifacts, buildings, and which is, of course, a central topic for archaeologists. After Husserl, such practices and the involved human experience are the basis of how people perceive and ascribe meaning to things, including, of course, resources. Thus, their detailed analysis will hopefully allow us to glimpse on this important relationship. Hence, the focus on this session will be, for instance, on how resources can be sensually experienced, how raw materials and tools are bodily incorporated within this skillful task of a craft. We will touch the topic on how these practices are transformed if one of the skills ingredients, let's say, the raw material, the tools, the body of the craftsperson, environmental or social aspects changed or has been even replaced. How can such a problem-solving process or in general learning trigger creativity? Moreover, in the field of craft, the term resources can be tackled in a two-folded way. It can be referred to the raw materials, but also to what has been described in a traditional Marxist sense as Produktivkräfte, action forces, and their knowledge. At a first glance, the latter seems to be not directly tangible. However, at a second glance, it becomes obvious that this resource is far from being immaterial. Knowledge is largely incorporated within the body and stretches into the world through what is today described as extended mind or Merleau-Ponty's Leib or Husserl Leib. To reach from this micro level to a large scale, we might observe how these practices are entangled also beyond the situation described above, within societies and their wider environment. Who is involved in the task, and can we integrate these tasks into what Ingold calls taskscapes or similar into interrelated bundles of practices according to praxeological approaches? These are, of course, just some ideas which will probably not even represent the tip of the iceberg. And I'm sure that our speakers will hijack us to much more exciting ways of seeing and approaching this topic. Therefore, we are today very happy that we could gain Trevor Margent, Emeritus of the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, as our first keynote speakers. And based on his training as an architect, he built on a tremendous experience in the area of what he calls hands-on knowledge in different regions in Nigeria, Yemen, Mali, and exotic places like East London. He established an extremely rewarding method in anthropology, which is, in my point of view, so helpful for us to understand skill, contextual problem solving, and the way it is communicated within groups. Today, he will present us his work about boat building in Oman in relation to also experimental archaeology. Our second keynote speaker is Michael Kuppers. He is an archaeologist from the University of Leiden where he has now, of course, a perfect environment to study topics at the intersection between theory and material science. And his PhD in archaeology of skill has dealt with metallurgy in a broader sense and is an excellent example of making these different research approaches very fruitful. And thus we are looking very much forward here to hear more of his work. The significance of sensory perception will be presented by Nadia Melko of the University of Bern. And as an archaeologist and a craftsperson, she is exploring the context of a special set of skills relevant for the production and consumption of wheel-thrown Roman conical bowls in the space between Lake Neuchâtel and Lake Constance. Now, Sarah Finlayson and Julia Wild, probably, from the University of Heidelberg, explore the Aegean evidence of small stone gem and gem production, which is all these fanciful small seals in the Aegean, through the lens of craft communities at Ida Oberstein, the German gem production center of the 19th century and beginning of 20th century. And thus they will combine historical and archaeological studies. The next couple of researchers is Nikos Papadimitriou and Akis Goumas from the University of Heidelberg, respectively Harvard Center of Hellenic Studies. And they explore the implication skill has and the whole idea of skill for the development of creativity. And through the observation of experimental processes within the archaeological record, and especially within the so-called gold embroidery at the shaft tombs of Mycenae. And finally, we started with Trevor Margent in architecture. And now the last presentation, we leave again small finds and pottery and come back to architecture, and especially the wooden architecture of Neolithic Northern Greece. And Tryphon Yakoulis will allow us insight into this extraordinary preserved architecture, which will give us the opportunity to approach quantitative and qualitative parameters of the craft of architecture. And now the cycle is closed to Trevor Margent's master builders, and I'm very happy. I think Trevor Margent will give up his presentation as a video, so I will go back to Nico Schimmel and hope that he can switch on the video.